state of an individual soul. He compares the soul to a two-horse chariot. One of these horses, which he associates with a person's appetites or desires, Socrates says is stubborn and must be controlled. The other horse, which he associates with spiritedness, is noble and can be used by reason, which he associates with the charioteer, to help control the stubborn horse. But if a person doesn't learn how reason can make use of spiritedness in order to rein in desire, then that person will be just as misdirected as the chariot controlled by the stubborn horse.
So consequently, Epicurus dichotomizes pleasure into ones which satisfy our desires as it occurs, which is called a kinetic state of pleasure, and the state experienced with those desires, when those desires are fulfilled, which is called static pleasure. An example provided by Cicero, which was a later follower of the Epicurean school of philosophy, is that of drinking, right? The process of drinking to satisfy one's thirst impacts different bodily organs, such as our stomach, in contrast to the state that we feel after we are full, right? So we have the static versus kinetic differentiation. Although critics debase hedonism for equating pleasure at the behest of virtuous living, hedonistic philosophers such as John Stuart Mill distinguish between higher and lower pleasures, in which quality of the pleasure we are pursuing is a basis for distinction, which is similar to Plato's act of measurement. So it's not just a bacchanalian anything goes type of mentality as we see it in many of these film clips, right? There is a differentiation between engaging in moderate drinking, right, which gives you a sense of pleasure in the here and now and also tomorrow, and then being like Homer Simpson, right? A pleasure right now, but then you're suffering from pain tomorrow, right? For a hedonistic philosopher such as Epicurus, that's not attaining a pleasurable experience if you're still suffering tomorrow or next week.
That's a problem for future Homer. Man, I don't envy that guy.
John Stuart Mill is most famous for his harm principle, which is a critical component of democratic nations, and this extends from his hedonistic understanding in that human beings as individual sovereigns are free to do as they like unless their actions harm others. There are many logistical fallacies in lots of these philosophical positions, right? Which is why in psychology, it's important that we always begin at a first principles basis, right? Doing whatever you want unless it doesn't harm anyone. We can use the example of wearing a seatbelt versus drinking in our society, right? I can choose to not wear a seatbelt, right? But I would get a ticket. $200, I have to go to the courthouse, waste my entire Wednesday afternoon, right? But it's not harming anyone else, right? Maybe it's just my stomach, right? But I'm still penalized for it. Whereas drinking alcohol, and I have an entire video produced on the dangers of its second, third-hand effects, with more than 52 million Americans reporting that someone else's alcohol has adversely impacted them. So that right there is a clear violation of the utilitarian principle, right? I can do whatever I want unless I don't harm anyone. Maybe, yeah, I moderately drink and I'm a responsible drinker, but the activity which is causing infinite pleasure, I mean, it's the norm in society, it still has a deeply chaotic, malignant, violent detriment to our society, right? So I'm using this point to illustrate that this issue of well-being, satiation, how much stimulus, how much need do we want to fulfill our base innate pleasures is still something we're trying to struggle with as a society. Lots of the conversation on legalizing drugs, for example, recreationally goes towards that, right? It makes people feel good. People are stressed out, they want to feel good, right? What's the difference between smoking a joint and having a glass of white wine, right? So it's important for us to ask ourselves, where do we stand on these different positions in society, not just at an abstract level, but also at a practical level, right? When I work with a 14-year-old, many of them are drinking for the first time, right? if I'm just an objective hedonistic psychologist, then you know what? Be responsible. Don't drink and drive. But that's entirely up to you to do, right? But again, I use a moral existential position, right? And in that, for me, drinking alcohol at 14 years old is symptomatic of a larger spiritual issue, right? The child feels neglected. The child is trying to fit in. The child may have parents who are drinking, right? And he feels like he's emulating them, right? So I want to explore those different trajectories.
Look, I study hard all week. When the weekend comes, I want to relax. I mean, that's the whole reason why I joined the fraternity, so I can have some fun.
I don't object to fun. I love fun. In fact, I'm the grand funk master of fun. But I don't need to take a drink to have a good time, and neither do you.
And I alluded to the idea of utilitarianism, right? Jeremy Bentham carried this idea of pleasure to a different level. Jeremy Bentham stated that what is most good is what achieves most good for the most amount of people. So, right, that's the utilitarian argument, right? I am pretty sure we've all heard of this in our introduction to philosophy class in this train scenario, right? If you have a train of 100 people and you can choose to save them by killing one person, would you do it, right? And then you had people who were arguing for saving the one person, right? I remember in high school debate class, some person said, oh, what if that person was like the next MLK and that person was going to, killing that one person would cause war later on. So, right, everybody was using utilitarian arguments. And an interesting twist to this paradigm of utilitarianism was used by Christopher Nolan in the film Dark Knight. So let's watch a clip of that right here.
At midnight, I blow you all up. If, however, one of you presses the button, I'll let that boat live. So, who's it gonna be? Harvey Dent's most wanted scumbag collection, or the sweet and innocent civilians? You choose. Oh, and you might want to decide quickly, because the people on the other boat may not be quite so noble.
Give it to me.
This is a very interesting clip, right? Because the scene highlights this divergence from pure egotistical hedonism as we understood it in those prior clips, right? Individuals doing whatever they want to express their maximum amount of happiness, right? This shows that the categories of pleasure and doing the most good sometimes means self-sacrifice, right? Which is alluding to our second lecture, which goes more into a spiritual Islamic understanding of well-being, in which sacrifice, submission is the cornerstone of doing well in this life and the hereafter, or the world of spirits, if we're using some indigenous terminology. This idea of utilitarianism is not something to be entirely dismissed, because Jeremy Bentham was pinning happiness to your own subjective evaluation of values towards a life worth living. For example, someone who is a materialist will come to believe that they need to maximize money, finances, and social status to reach their peak level of happiness. Bentham does not criticize this person ipso facto, but rather their use of money at an instrumental level. Are they using money to bring the maximum amount of happiness to their self, their family, their community, and wider world? Maybe this person with a lot of money decides to open up a brand new water park and give free admission to all of the children in Houston or New York, and untold changes in the pleasure neurons of millions of children are changed as a result. At a utilitarian level, this is a life worth living. This millionaire, billionaire used their funding, right, to create maximum amount of good in their society. I'm also linking an article below which delves deeper into this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as Thomas Jefferson wrote about in our article, and some of the criticism that he had against overindulgence and a pursuit of happiness being more of a stable equanimity, a peaceful state of mind. So you can read that in the description below.